This is the Ambition and Life podcast, where we challenge the status quo, rethink leadership, and reimagine work for the world we actually live in. I'm your host, Kara Storrigan, product leader, solo parent, and advocate for systems that work better for everyone. Each episode, you'll hear real stories and practical strategies from leaders, parents, and changemakers, building a future where ambition and care can thrive together, because the future of work is flexible, human, and values-led. And it starts right here. Hi, Nikki. I'm so excited to have you joining me on this discussion. You have such a unique perspective for our audience. As the founder of Scene Culture, your mission is to shine a light on untapped potential in service of your vision, where everyone feels truly seen at work. And this resonates so deeply with me, so I'm so grateful for your time. You came into my sphere because you recently advertised for a key leadership role, and what really struck me was your thoughtful approach to job design. It wasn't that standard rigid template that ticked boxes for flexibility. Instead, it was a design that opened doors for people with big ambition and big lives, which is what we're all about here on this podcast. It created space for flexibility, for rhythm and inclusion. I can't wait to chat to you about this, but first, let's start with you. Tell me about Nikki, your why, and the journey that led you to founding Scene Culture.
Sure, thank you. A bit about me in terms of the origin story behind why Scene Culture really dates back to when I was very, very young. I am a child of Filipino parents, each of them siblings of 10. Unfortunately, not all of those siblings actually made it to adulthood just because they were, living on the poverty line, and it was really, really difficult to kind of keep the family going, so to speak. And so it was a big factor as to, why there was such a strong motivation to migrate to a place like Australia, where obviously, there is much more opportunity. Now, that said, they were obviously still challenged with a lot of cultural assimilation types of challenges, as well as financial challenges and relational challenges too between each other, which ultimately resulted in their divorce, which actually is, I'm pretty sure it's not even legal in the Philippines.
Wow.
Yeah. And so it's quite a different thing to
Yes.
pursue when you have that kind of cultural background and you've been conditioned in that way. And so you can imagine the disparity that would have existed between my parents. Unfortunately, what that meant for me is that I had a bit of a broken family growing up. I was primarily raised by my grandmother, who didn't speak any English, and so it resulted in my own verbal development skills being quite stunted, and in fact not being able to speak, or being mute for the first few years of. Because of that, I developed a skill of being able to read people when I couldn't read words. And it's, I guess, that like in parallel with this feeling of never quite feeling seen, lonely child, often forgotten, didn't quite have a voice, literally, figuratively. There's a consistent theme that persisted throughout my schooling and in my early career as a result, which meant there was a huge personal conviction to do work where people were seen beyond perhaps their job title or their demographics, for instance. And it's a big driver for the work that I do. Now, aside from the personal motivation, I also have a background in HR and positive psychology and coaching psychology too. And when you put together that experience, in the industry and also experience working in education. I used to teach at Melbourne University in the science of wellbeing, motivation, performance. And you couple that with the conviction and the background story that I have, it's just it wasn't an idea, it was just the next iteration.
Wow, that's so powerful. And thank you for being so honest. I think a lot of people I speak to don't want the glossy stories. They really want to understand the journeys that people have taken and those hardships. So I really appreciate, that honesty and that share. And, how amazing to now be able to take that life, all of those life learnings and skills and start changing that for other people. In your work, how do you define unseen potential?
It can rightly so be interpreted in a number of different ways. For me personally, what it means to be unseen is to not be fully appreciated for the extent of your capabilities or for not having a great understanding as to who your whole self is
Mm.
beyond your job title. And if we add on the potential element of it, like what's your unseen potential, it's those, strengths or skills or experiences or perspectives that someone might have that is able to be utilized in a way that benefits both the individual and, the team or business, that hasn't yet been tapped because it's not visible, it's not recognized, it's not quite valued and opted. And so that's how I define unseen
Yeah,
potential.
wonderful. How do you think leaders can do a better job in uncovering this unseen potential and really making it seen in workplaces? Because I think there's still a lot of work to do, right? Which is one of the reasons that you're driving the change that you are.
I'll put aside my promo of the business because that is one thing that I would typically point to when asked a question like this. But as a starting point, at the end of the day, what we need is attention and time from leaders and management to understand who we are and what we could bring. In this day and age when time and attention is in hot demand and constantly being pulled in all sorts of direction, what that means is when we do get it, it means something, as an
Yeah.
as an individual employee, for instance, that does want to feel appreciated for what they can offer. And so being intentional about how we're engaging in, for instance, one-to-one conversations with people in our teams, being present and asking questions like, what's a skill or strength that you have that we haven't been able to fully
Mm,
utilize yet? Acknowledgement that I know that as a manager or a leader, I don't fully understand the full stretch of your capabilities. Tell me what I need to know. How and showing that interest and that curiosity. It may require some follow-up questions, but I think when people see the intent, it starts to open a dialogue that makes it more comfortable.
I love those simple questions that leaders can leverage to really get employees and individuals thinking about it. So it's kind of a two-way street, right? That you're all in it together, but the leader's really helping to tap into that. I love that. So taking a little bit of a shift, you've recently been hiring for a C-suite role in your startup. I saw the JD and it really wowed me, to be honest, because it didn't seem like another role description. It really was designed differently. And for me, when I read it, it really recognized that care and life can coexist with ambition, which I think is really, really important. We explicitly called out things like 4 or 5 day rhythms, hybrid or remote, working on the rhythms of the individual, and really keeping that openness. And if I think about the culture at the moment and a lot of the narrative in the media around startup culture and even big business really glorifying, giving it all, always being on, working the big hours, your approach seemed different. And it definitely showed me that your business wasn't just saying that you wanted to find unseen talent. You're really living that through your values and through your hiring and recruitment. I really believe that this type of approach can unlock opportunity for different people who might not want to put their hands up to the old version of working. And it might be a really important lever to make leadership more accessible for different walks of life. So I'm really curious to dig into this. Why did you take that approach to the job design?
Thank you. It's a question that I don't get asked very frequently, and so it's great to be able to speak to this. To me, and this is largely stemmed as well from my background in positive psychology, and I know that you're probably familiar with this concept of promoting self-determination in an
Mm,
individual, which broadly highlights three different factors in promoting autonomy, in promoting connection, and also in promoting competence or mastery, if you will. And being able to design roles that are intentional about giving space to those things that I know are not just key to an individual's well-being, but also key to their performance. It's an approach that I've taken. Now, overlaid with this other concept of job crafting, which looks at how might we craft, the way that we, for instance, manage our tasks, our relationships, and also how we cognitively think of the meaning behind why we do what we do. There are also factors that I am intentional about designing into the job, particularly as well. The research shows it also is a big driver in not just well-being, but motivation and performance more broadly too. One other, I guess, factor that I am very passionate about is ensuring that when a job advert is put out there, that it isn't inadvertently excluding some people just in the way that it's written or in the chat it's advertised. And so I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm an expert specifically on this, but because I know that, I've been intentional about reviewing it for diversity, equity, and inclusion best practices to make sure that the language that's used is appealing to those who might be underrepresented, as well as ensuring that the channels in which they're shared aren't typical to, what the masses support. And that it's accessible even if you're a candidate that isn't necessarily on a paid job boards kind of platform. And so there are all of these considerations that I think are really important to make sure that you have the greatest pool of candidates that are there, such that you are being really inclusive to who is being assessed for the job opportunity.
Yeah, I love that. And I certainly had some thoughts around what you'd respond there around the DEI nature, but I hadn't thought about, well, how do you really leverage those positive psychology and those levers to really help people be motivated, autonomous, and drive that performance? That's such an interesting way to start thinking about that. And so I guess leading on from them, what advice would you give to senior leaders, executives or founders in terms of how they might take some of this leadership in terms of great job role design, particularly when we think about senior roles? Because I certainly think we probably think about a lot of these, at maybe more individual contributor level, but I feel like as we go up the ladder, things become a bit more traditional. So I'm really curious, what would your advice be to others crafting job roles and descriptions that really do open doors for different types of talent?
Absolutely. I think that I would caution is how and when and why you might utilize certain AI tools to support. So I'm a big advocate of using AI in a number of different ways. We know, however, that it can have its limitations to things like screening and what inadvertent coded bias may be in such tools. And so I used AI for elements of it. One example is putting initially a draft position description of how I might write it up myself, and then asking AI to pretend to be a DEI practitioner, calling out specific recommendations on how it can be more inclusive in the way that it's not only written, but in the way that it's also distributed and promoted. And so that's one tip for something like that. But also, in terms of designing the role, it's not enough to look at what are the skills that are needed, which is typically where we tend to focus, but rather what is the mindset that's needed, not for the role that's here, but also for the stage of where we're at as a business and for the market. And so you might find that there's someone that's incredibly values aligned and perhaps even has all of the relevant skills in a similar sized industry or background, but perhaps they don't have the right skills, right? And for me, I'll have my own idea of, well, all of those things are important, but I'll apply my own different weighting to what is most important and least important. So in my particular case, because of where we are as a business and we're a very young organization, what's important is to know and appreciate the certain challenges and demands that do come with working in an early stage startup environment. And so if someone has applied that only has a corporate background that doesn't have that transferable kind of tenacity, then they may have different expectations for what urgent means. Maybe to them, urgent means 3 months. To me, urgent means 30 minutes, And so things like that.
It's a great, very simple example of the different requirements. I love that sort of those tips around AI, because I think we often hear about AI in speeding things up, doing the filtering, but actually really bringing it in early and thinking about those prompts to bring out, you know, how do we make it more equitable, inclusive. I think that's, yeah, a fantastic tip. Obviously, one of my key drivers is around, well, how do we make the world better for single parents? So, if we're serious about unlocking leadership opportunities for carers, single parents, what is a systematic change that you think is really important in that space?
It's a really good question. And I should declare I'm not a single parent myself. And so I don't pretend to, be an expert in this space. However, what I think is important, and this is true, I believe, for anyone that is in the product tech world or in general, is understanding who your ICP or user is from a empathy mapping or persona perspective. If we're intentional about wanting to engage solo parents, what I know is that they don't have the same flexibility in relation to being able to share caregiving duties with a co-parent, right, or a partner, in which case you might expect that there might be different ways in which we can access their attention if their attention needs to be divided across different things. But also, the thing about being a solo parent is that, I imagine anyway, and I say this, I don't know how many transferable kinds of resonance there is, but I'm a solo founder and I envy a lot that have a co-founder in their business and where you can share the load. But certainly
Yes.
something that I, certainly something that I, can relate to is the fact that, I need to be incredibly resourceful with the time and attention and financial kind of resources that I have. What that suggests is an ability to be really lean, but also high impact in the way that I deliver certain outcomes. And it comes with an approach of thinking about what action will have scalable impact rather than a one for one. How do we make 1+1 = 3 or 10 for that matter? I see the same thing in solo parents. I just look at them and I think, how are you able to excel at doing what you do, given that, typically those sorts of caretaking duties are divided? It's crazy. And they are, yeah, my biggest
Love that.
admiring leaders. Yeah.
Love that. How do they make 1+1 = 3? And also the value in the fact that, you know, sometimes we think, oh, well, they can't be as available as someone else, but actually every time they're doing work, it's about the impact, the outcome. And, how do you make it even more? So there's some real benefits there. I think that's a very interesting analogy between the solo founder and the solo parent. I'm sure there's a lot of synergies in terms of how people think about their businesses when they're just, newborns. Looking ahead, what gives you hope and what excites you most about the future when it comes to creating equity and opportunity?
What gives me hope? It's the little things, it's the little things like getting a message from Karis saying, I'd love to interview you on a podcast because these are my values and this is the message I want to put out into the world. And having this organic alignment, not because we already know each other or we're trying to influence each other's agenda, but because it already exists. And then it's just a nice coincidence that there's such a strong alignment there. Being able to seeing more and more of that, as I'm on my own journey of growing and building scene culture, that actually, initially I thought that I was quite lonely in this pursuit, but the more that you become visible, right, and seen to a broader market or a broader pool of people or community, the more opportunity exists. And so I kind of feel like I'm in a lot of ways reinforcing the underlying concepts behind scene culture, in that when you do get seen, it does present more and more opportunities, and it's ever generating.
Yeah, awesome. I love that. And so, moving through our conversation, we've discussed a couple of strategies and you've given some really good tips, I think, for our listeners. What is one, I think every leader should have in their toolkit to think about role design and attracting diverse talent to really put front of mind, unlocking that unseen potential that your business is really wanting to drive forward?
What I would say is there's probably two things, actually. a lot of business managers and leaders know about putting together a lean canvas. It's kind of like a business plan on a page where you identify, what's the problem that you're addressing, what are the channels that you operate within, who are the key stakeholders that you have, what are the key distribution channels, etc. When it comes to job design, what's really interesting is that you can do the same for a job, not just a business. And there are lots of parallels in this approach to the concept of job crafting that I mentioned earlier. And there is what's called a job canvas, actually, that is a really, really similar format to a business lean canvas, but through the lens of an individual's role, to design it in such a way outside of your traditional position description. It's really speaking to the value and the impact that's there. And another thing would be, openness to feedback as to what your strengths are and what your growth opportunities are in alignment to whatever your goal is. And so if someone's goal is to get a promotion for a new role, okay, well, what are the things that are necessary to perform well in that new role? Let's get some feedback on the things that are working for them towards that. And the things where there might be a really great opportunity, which if they were able to grow into, could result in a significant shift and, inching them toward being a really good fit for that. We are very limited by our own assumptions about our capabilities. And so gaining that perspective from other people, not just within our team, but also our own managers, perhaps even those external, the ones that really will be honest with you as well, which might not always come from your direct reports. And so
Love that. Awesome. So you are such a powerful example of what becomes possible when we're courageous enough to design differently. If there's one final message you'd like our listeners to walk away with, what would it be?
everyone's got some sort of strength or skill or capability that hasn't yet been fully utilized, either because it's not recognized by others or maybe they don't recognize it in themselves, And I'm thinking about the people who relate to the concept of imposter syndrome here. Because that's true, what I want people to walk away with is really knowing and understanding what's the untapped, potential that you have. Work to understand it, get some feedback from others, and it will be incredibly revealing what motivation it could unlock in you.
Yeah. I love that. What a beautiful piece of advice. And finally, you are doing amazing work at Scene Culture. I'm really excited to see how your business grows and supports Australia and probably, hopefully globally. Tell us a bit about it and tell us how we can follow you. If there's anyone interested in finding out more, how they can get in touch.
So at Scene Culture, it's our mission to shine a light on untapped potential, and that is in service of our greater vision to create a world where everyone feels seen. And that's despite being underrepresented, neurodiverse, or introverted. A big part of what we do is level the playing field such that those people who don't have the same proximity to those key decision makers get a fair go of being considered for opportunities at work. Now, that's primarily once they're in the door for an opportunity for a project or a promotion or whatever that might be. You can take a look at our website. We've got two. Actually, there's sceneculture.com and there's also sceneteams.com. And we have recently just launched a free profile that people can engage with. To get just a starting point and a taster. So I'd point you towards that and you can get started on getting seen.
Awesome. And then our listeners can, start to understand their unseen talent as well, which is fantastic.
100%, yes.
And really follow through with your final piece of advice. Well, thank you. It was such a joy talking to you and getting your perspective. I had such a lovely time. So thank you so much, Nikki.
Thanks so much for having me. I've loved it.
You're so welcome. Thanks for joining me on the Ambition and Life podcast. If today's conversation resonated, please follow, rate, or share it with someone charting their own path. If there's a conversation we need to have or a voice we need to hear, get in touch. Because none of us should have to choose between ambition and life. And when we share stories, we shape systems. Until next time, stay courageous, stay intentional, and keep designing a life that honours your ambition and your humanity.